Yo, how's it going everybody? It's Sketch and welcome back to the channel. And on today's episode we're looking at Outriders, developed by People Can Fly and published by Square Enix for the PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, releasing in April of 2021. This new contender in the looter shooter game definitely has some unique traits to it, but even with those, it's hard to ignore the fair-sized list of problems, some minor, some major. It honestly might surprise you in some areas, but to some, this might not exactly replace your favorite current dystopian loot shooter, though even with its good parts it can shine. Though before we get into all that, let's talk about the story real quick. In the 22nd century, you play as an altered outrider, the last hope of the human race. Once the planet Earth becomes no longer inhabitable, humanity heads towards planet Enoch. This is a planet that has proven to be livable, but not without cataclysmic events which can essentially delete you. With your band of companions, you'll set out to comb the planet and trace a signal that may lead to information that's crucial to survival for the colony. That's really it in a nutshell. The story of Outriders isn't anything you haven't seen or heard before, though it has its moments. The story starts out fairly straightforward, but then kind of goes on a ride, which doesn't exactly make a whole lot of sense, but acts more so as a vehicle to carry these action set pieces through the game's 25 to 30 hour campaign. The developers People Can Fly have been in the game for a minute with some solid shooter games like Painkiller and Bulletstorm, which were both awesome. While most of that cast that produced those games aren't with the company anymore, you can still see the calling cards of their past work here in Outriders, with some of the Easter eggs and its brand of humor. Graphics wise, you've got a third-person RPG loot shooter that in appearance may feel familiar to The Division, Warframe, and even Anthem at times, just based on them all being similar in objective. Yet this has some massive ups and downs compared to the aforementioned titles. In-game, Outriders can look pretty dope with its lighting effects and at times vibrant environments. And as far as in-game effects work, there are some points where it does look really good. During the combat, the screen can actually get kind of bonkers with everything that's going on at a given moment. So that part is impressive. They managed to get so much on screen without tanking the performance. However, the main drawback of the graphics is its cutscenes. These are all over the shop, and some of them come off really looking cobbled together during a lot of the game. It almost looks like it's bouncing between three different engines at times, with some cutscenes having varying degrees of polish. There are some that look okay, others that look kinda strange or even at times unnecessary, and then there are the ones where it's kinda obvious that it was cut and pasted together. There's also a trend where every cutscene has a fade to black for nearly every action, no matter how minor or major. The bounties are the main offender here, since every time you finish those encounters, with the exception of once, the final animation is identical aside from the model of the bosses and the environment it's happening in. There's also the bits where, much like the demo, some animations are just flat out broken, especially when it comes to clipping through objects, clothing clipping through characters fairly often, and some Mass Effect Andromeda style facial animations which could serve as nightmare fuel for some, since the animations at times look like someone adjusting their dentures. Gameplay wise, what you see is what you get here in this third person loot shooter, and this department is actually not bad at all. The combat here is very reminiscent of Gears of War, so if you've played those games before, it should feel quite familiar. You can go at it solo or with a group of 3, and the game revolves around leveling up and progressing in the game's world tiers, of which there are 15. This world tier system was also featured in Anthem a couple years back, so again, another familiar mechanic which has an impact on the gameplay. The first 5 tiers are pretty manageable as far as enemy strength and numbers, but those higher levels, the further you get into the game, can get absolutely brutal if you're playing alone. Going through most of Outriders on tiers 8 through 10, I legit started getting slapped around pretty silly towards those final hours of the campaign. The combat loop does have some nuances though. With the 4 classes available, you get a lot of skills and 3 skill trees per character, which you can respec whenever you want, which is a really nice touch. The Trickster and the Technomancer classes as of last week did catch a couple nerfs, but I'm not sure exactly what changed there because they felt the same as they did on release day. There are some setups here where you can just straight up dump truck and stun lock enemies with the skill tree and your assignable skills. You can make some downright nasty builds, but keep in mind the back end of the game will smoke you like a pack of cools if you're playing solo, so co-op play is ideal, though not exactly required. Let's go ahead and address the main issue besides those cutscenes, the connectivity issues, which during launch weekend there were a lot of. This being an online all the time game, as soon as that server connection drops, your ass is getting fast tracked back to the title screen. Enemies can also completely refill their health at times, and if you're really unlucky, you might load into a scene of you falling into the maps. So again, gameplay is all over the shop, but when it works, it can be pretty fun. Enemy variety is admittedly not the greatest, but there are a few really good encounters which, had there been more of, that would have made a massive difference. You'll see a lot of similar enemies, but when you get introduced to the creatures of Enoch, you begin to see a lot more interesting enemy designs. Though here's the thing with the enemies and characters in general. The main characters, aside from the one you're playing, will have little to no development except for a few obvious story beats, usually to be seen once, maybe twice, and often never again after that. Granted, you'll have your main squad that will accompany you through most of the game, but again, you're going to see some familiar tropes with them. Moral of the story, this game borrows a lot from various sci-fi movies and game franchises, and it's not really trying to hide where they copy their notes from. Sound-wise, again, this is a bit of back and forth. The voice acting overall isn't terrible, but there's a lack of energy in most of the character performances except for a couple. It's got the vibe of One Take Drake, and they're out of the booth, which kind of feeds into the B-movie aesthetic Outriders sticks to here. Gunfire effects are also a bit all over the place, with some guns sounding pretty good, and then there's other ones that sound like someone's running a popcorn machine at a birthday party. Sound effects in general got some high points though. Melee attacks and the elemental Foley art can sound pretty sick at times. It's just strange that not everything is on the same level as other things. If you want to hear an amusing audio bug, open the map and then move it with the right stick and you'll hear what sounds like a car crash coming through your television or headset. Overall, Outriders has some really interesting things going on in the gameplay department, even though depending on your level of interest in these kinds of games, mileage may vary. The combat is fun most of the time, and there's some pretty good loot to grind for, and there's a lot of stuff to do throughout the world. Though it's not without its faults, which may hinder the experience for some, but if you can embrace the jank within, you can squeeze some fun out of this one. When it works, it's fun, but whew boy, when it doesn't work, it can fall on its face in some crucial areas. Outriders gets a 7 out of 10, and if you're playing on Xbox, it's available on the Game Pass for a reduced price. Otherwise, depending on which platform you're playing it on, I'd maybe consider waiting until it gets a bit of a discount since they're all still full retail price. There's fun to be had here, but compared to the other games, especially the established ones in the genre, it's got a ways to go before it's a serious competitor, even with its strong points. It does have a vast amount of in-game activities to tackle as well, so if this is your type of game, then give it a try. But be wary of the state as it is currently. And I thank you again for checking out this video. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you can use it as a resource. Check back often. We'll have more video reviews and commentaries coming up in the near future. But until then, take it easy, stay safe out there, and I'll see you on the next one.